الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
They become confused if they don't have those answers. But you need, within the ummah, you need a group. وَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ طَائِفَةٌ يَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. There has to be always a group that understands the religion so that they can refute the obfuscations that people make. And you can see in the West, Christianity has really suffered. And so what remains now amongst, although there are still some Christian intellectuals, but by and large, the majority of the people that now represent that faith do not have the intellectual training or abilities to defend the faith, and atheism begins to thrive and religion diminishes, and this has happened. So and the idea, if you just look, like, why is the vine motif so common in Islamic architecture? What he was talking about, how art reflects the metaphysical understanding of the religion. The vine, if you go to all of our great masajid around the world, you'll see this motif, even in Medina. If you look in the Ottoman, which is quite late and it's already influenced, it's a little bit Baroque and it's influenced by European architecture, which is interesting also because there was a fire in the 1830s and Abdul Majid I funded the rebuilding of the Prophet's Mosque, and so they were already being influenced by European architects. So you'll see some European motifs in the Mosque of the Prophet. But one of the things that you'll see is the vine motif. It's very common. And the reason for that is because of the three kingdoms. The metaphysical tradition had the kingdoms, the vegetable, mineral, and then the animal. The vine represented will, because the vine has a type of irada that other plants don't have. It moves, and it has an inner directedness. And one of the Arabic words for vine is the ashaq, which is the ishq of the vine. Ashiqa ya'shaqu is to intertwine. And so this intense love that we call ishq in Arabic is related to the vine when it wraps around. And so you'll see the vine is on prayer rugs. You'll see this vine, and it's in the masajid because it represents metaphysically, in the vegetable world, it represents the highest vegetative state, which is this inner directedness. And gold is the highest of the mineral kingdom because it's incorruptible. And man is the highest of the animal kingdom because he's the caliph. So you'll see these things all throughout our tradition, and they're being lost. Muslims, unfortunately, today are blowing up these great, the Mosque of Yunus, alayhi salam. This has been around for 1,000 years in Mosul. They just blew it up. It's just madness, complete insanity. So back to fiqh, usul al-fiqh. Come down to the earth now. So we went, yesterday we were looking at his introduction on usul al-fiqh. And in the next section, he talks about the importance of the Arabic language. Well, before that, let's see if we can, the nafida. So nafida, the nafida is, it's a group that goes out. It's called the vanguard. It's like tali'a. So he's got this chapter which he calls a nafida, which is like the vanguard. And the question that he asks is, how are rulings derived in our tradition? And the mujtahid is called a mutasarrif. يتصرف في الأدلة. So tasarruf is this ability to he says yuqallib an-nazar, is to look deeply into matters, and so tasarruf is taqallub. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about tasrih al-riyah, the movement of the winds is one of the things. Yusarrif al-riyah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala moves the winds. And so this movement, this inner intellectual movement with the light of the intellect to arrive at some understanding and to bring out and draw out the meanings of the nusus, of these texts of the book and the sunnah. The Quran talks about الَّذِينَ يَسْتَنبِطُونَهُ minhum, those who make istinbat. And nabat is the first water that comes out of the spring. And so yastanbitu is to draw out those meanings from the Quran. And that's what the faqih or the mujtahid does, is yastanbitu hadhihi al-ma'ani. And so he says that you have the nutq, right, which is the actual statement itself, the nutq. It's the logos, it's what's expressed, it's what's articulated. But then you have the mafhum, and this is what the faqih is dealing with. He's dealing with the nutq, which is the utterance itself, and then what is understood from that. And that's where all the problems arrive. It arrives in the mafhum, not in the mantuq. So you have the mantuq, which is what's spoken. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks in language and speaks to us through the prophets in language. But language has problems because it's not precise, it's ambiguous. And so they're different. So in terms of what's called dilalat al-lafz fi mahal al-nutq, you have 5 different connotations or different dilalat, these significations, what they mean. So you have what's called the nas, which is just the outward, and then it's the actual text itself. And then the zahir, what's the most apparent meaning. And then you have dilalatul iqtida. So when you deal with tasawwurat, which is how you conceptualize things, a conceptualization of something implies also other things. So for instance, if you understand what fire is, the iqtida yaqtadi an-nar. What's understood from fire, from smoke, is fire. Even though the fire is not in the smoke, but you derive from that. So this is a type of signification, is seeing that. And then you have dilalatul ishara, which is a more subtle understanding. It's something that comes out. Are you filming this? Because I don't want it filmed. No. Oh, okay. Oh, mashallah, you have it. Is it online? Yeah. Subhanallah. I didn't know it was online. Okay, because you were holding it up. I was like, yeah. No, I believe you. I believe you. I just don't like people. I believe you. Yeah, I should have thought of husn al-dhann, you know. I should have thought, of course, you're reading the book from the iPad. But I didn't. You know, so, some of them, they say, you know, وَخَسْرَتَانِ لَيْسَ شَيْءٌ يُوجَدُ فَوْقُهُمَا مِنَ الْخَيْرَاتِ يُحْمَدُ حُسْنُ ظَنٍ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ بِالْعِبَادِ فَكُنْهُمَا وَجَنِّبَنَ لِلْعِنَادِ. There's 2 qualities that are above every other quality. Good opinion of God and a good opinion of the servants of God, right? And so he said, so follow those and don't be obstinate. You know, don't say I'm not. But one of the later scholars, he said, حُسْنَ الظَّنِّ فِي الْأَيَّامِ مَنْقَصَةٌ فَظُنَّ شَرًّا وَكُنْ مِنْهُ عَلَى وَجَلِ. Like having good opinion these days is not advisable. Think the worst and then beware. So that's like, you know, he who hesitates is lost, right? But you know, look before you leap. Right? Because these proverbs that have opposite meanings, they're they're because they're contextualized. And this is what the fuqaha do. They do tahqiqun manat, which is to understand when you apply the proverb. So there's times when he who hesitates is lost is the appropriate. As you're seeing the tsunami coming, you don't say, what should I do? No, you run like the animals. All the animals got out of there, right? The Aboriginals, they saw the animals all heading for the hills, so they went for the hills, right? Because if the animals are going, it's something is up. And then, everybody else, all these stupid tourists, right? I mean, you don't really need the adjective. All you need is tourists, and that should tell you. But the stupid tourists, they saw the waves receding, and they all went out, oh, let's go look at the coral. And the animals are saying it's time to head for the hills, because the animals are in fitra, but the people are not in fitra. The Aboriginal people knew it, because they had traditions. Their ancestors told them, if you see the water receding, head for the hills. And some of the elephants put children on their backs. They didn't put adults, because they know it's the adults that caused the tsunami, right? The children didn't do it. They're innocent, right? People they don't want to relate natural disasters to human behavior. This is the modern world. They want to pretend that natural disasters are just that's all they are. It's just natural disaster. It has nothing to do with what we're doing. But we affect the world. Our physical aspects affect the world. We know that. As we pollute, the oceans get polluted. The acidity of the oceans is rising every year. Well, the acidity in our blood is rising. That the acidosis is one of the major epidemics on the planet now, because diabetes is one of the fastest growing illnesses. So there's a relationship between our blood, which is very similar in its constituents to ocean water, right? There's a relationship to our blood and to the oceans. And there's also, when he said that nothing's going to remain except the mice and the lice, that's a metaphysical reality, because if you look at the animals that are disappearing in the world, they are not the mice and the lice. They're not the cockroaches. They're flourishing. It's the high exalted animals that people used to name their children after, like saqar. The falcons are disappearing. The tigers are disappearing. The gazelles are disappearing. The whales are disappearing. The ocean is actually, the jellyfish are flourishing. Spineless, mindless consumers. They're flourishing. But the whales, they're not. So there's a relationship between what's happening to us in the microcosmic world and what's happening out there. And if we want to change, the real environmental crisis is here. It's not out there. That is only a reflection of what's happening in here. It's the pollution of our souls that is manifesting in the physical world, the apparent, the phenomenon, what is appearing. So that's all that's happening. And these are metaphysical realities which people have lost, but the ancients knew them. ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. Corruption, pollution, deterioration, degradation, all these meanings of fasad have manifested on the land and in the seas because of what people's hands have been doing, what they've been earning. That's why it's happening. So back to, and then diladatul ima. These are the 5 significations of the nutq or the mantuq. But then when you go into the mafhum, it has 2, mafhum al-muwafaqa and mafhum al-mukhalafa. Right? So, and the Hanafis have certain different variations. So mafhum al-mukhalafa and mafhum al-muwafaqa relate to the a priori understanding, something that precedes the actual, it's something you understand before the thing itself. So, like I said, if Allah says don't curse your parents, then what we would understand, and I'm using a priori incorrectly and loosely, but it's something that you would understand before you understood. In other words, if Allah says do not speak ill to them, then the mafhum al-awla would be don't hit them or don't do anything. Right? And so so then he goes into the need of the faqih for Arabic. And I just want to read this because it's a very beautiful section. How many people know Arabic in here? Oh, good, a lot. So this, you'll appreciate this. He says, هذا عنوان اخترناه لتنبيه المهتمين باستنباط الأحكام من الكتاب والسنة والمتصدرين للقضاء والفتوى وأساتذة الجامعات إلى أهمية إتقان اللغة العربية كإتقان مصطلح الحديث أو أصول الفقه. وهذا المدخل هو أيضا إهابة بطلبة الدراسات الإسلامية وكليات الشريعة الذين قد يظن بعضهم أن اللغة العربية هي شأن طلاب كلية اللغة العربية أو كلية الآداب، ونهيب بأولئك ليعطوا اللغة العربية من العناية ما تستحق، فهي شرط أساسي ومفتاح ضروري لفتح أبواب الشريعة، إذ بدون معرفتها تلتبس عليهم الوجوه وتلتوي بهم السبل ويحزون في غير مفصل ويفزعون إلى غير معقل، لأن القرآن الكريم نزل بلسان عربي مبين، وقال تعالى وإنه لتنزيل رب العالمين نزل به الروح الأمين على قلبك لتكون من المنذرين بلسان عربي مبين. وقال تعالى وكذلك وحينا إليك قرآنا عربيا، وقال تعالى إنا جعلناه قرآنا عربيا لعلكم تعقلون، وإلى غير ذلك من الآيات التي تشير إلى عربية القرآن. ولا أقول عروبته، فالقرآن رباني المبدأ عالمي التطبيق. قال تعالى وما أرسلناك إلا كافة للناس بشيرا ونذيرا، وليس دعوة لأقوام عن أقوام ولا لزمان عن زمان. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وكان النبي يبعث إلى قومه خاصة وبعثت إلى كل أحمر وأسود. So he's saying in a very beautiful Arabic that it's necessary to revive, really. So he's really saying that we have to prepare these students in the Islamic studies and in the Sharia colleges to be grounded in the Arabic language. And he's saying that don't think that Arabic is a matter that concerns the Arabic language colleges or Arabic literature. He said that he's encouraging these people to really give the Arabic language the type of focus and the type of concern that it deserves, because it is a foundational condition and it is the necessary key to open the doors of the Sharia. The doors are closed if you don't know Arabic. It's as simple as that. Arabic is a key. And that will let you into the house. And then there are other skills that you need to know to be able to navigate the house, to know where the kitchen is, to know where the dining room is, and then to know the adab of the house, because the house has adab if you're a guest in the house. This is the house that God has given us. And then he mentions if they do that, they're going to, like a surgeon, they will cut in the wrong place, or they'll flee to the wrong place. They won't have a place of protection. They'll go to the wrong place. That the roads will become confused. They'll become crooked. They'll lose the straight path. And so he says that Allah sent this generous Quran down in a clear Arabic tongue. And then he quotes the ayahs of the Quran. This is a revelation from the Lord of the worlds that has come from the trustworthy Spirit, the Holy Spirit, on your heart, in order that you might be a warner in a clear Arabic tongue. And also we have revealed this in Arabic, and we made this a Quran, an Arabic Quran, in order that you might use your aql, use this intellect of yours, that you might understand it in the proper way. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he says, this indicates Arabiyyat al-Quran, and then he says, and I'm not saying urubatahu. So the Quran is Arabic, but it's not Arab. Right? So he's distinguishing between Arabiyya and Uruba. Uruba is related to a specific ethnic group of people that are called Arab. But the Arabiyya is a tongue that anybody can learn. And in that way, they become Arabic because the Prophet ﷺ removed Uruba from the Arabic nature of the tongue. And he said, "Man takallama al-arabiyyata fahuwa Arabi." Whoever speaks Arabic is Arabic. Right? So ethnically you're not an Arab, but linguistically you are an Arab. And in that way, the Arabic becomes our lingua franca. Right? This is a term. French used to be the language of diplomats for a few centuries because the French were very powerful, and so diplomats all learned French. Now the diplomatic language is English because they're the most powerful. The Americans, the English, and then the Americans became the most powerful. And so, but in the Muslim civilization, Arabic was the lingua franca, and to a certain degree Persian. Undeniably, in the Eastern Arabic tradition, Persian became extremely important. Indians learned Persian. Every educated Indian Muslim learned Persian. Urdu, which is a hybrid language of Arabic, a little bit of Turkish, a large percentage of Persian and Sanskrit. All of these educated people in what is now Pakistan, what used to be part of India or Hind, they knew Persian. So it was part of the civilization. Many great books were written in Persian. The Sunni scholars, many of them, Ghazali wrote in Persian. He was a great stylist in Persian and Arabic. So they mastered, and they were multilingual. So Muslims traditionally were polylingual in many places. They knew more than one language. It's very important to learn more than one language. The Prophet ﷺ could speak with people. He knew what he knew just in the Arabic language is not possible, humanly possible. It's not. And in fact, the Arab, the great grammarians have a qaida in Arabic. They say, لا يحيط بالعربية إلا نبي. No one can know all of Arabic except a prophet, because it's too vast as a language. And I would, for any Arab, just go online and look at Lisan al-Arab by Ibn Mandur, and just look at the word arada, the root ayn, ra, da. Just look at the pages of meaning that come out of that one root, and then marvel at how one human being could know that much about the Arabic language, Ibn Mandur. But he was a specialist, and so that's quite rare. So mastery of the Arabic language was very important in the Islamic civilization, and this is why in the early portion of the Islamic civilization, Muslims learned Arabic in the same way that educated Europeans knew Latin during the medieval period. And in the later period, they learned French. French was the language that all educated Europeans knew. And today it's English. So you have Germans, they all speak English. Danish all speak English, because it's the language now that has become the dominant language. Historically, all educated Muslims knew Arabic. This was part of education. And even the ones that had very minimal education knew how to read Arabic. And most of our vernaculars, the provincial tongues that Muslims spoke with, were written in Arabic. So if you look at Hausa land, for instance, the Nigerians, they're now Nigerians, but if you look at the Fulani, the Hausa, the Mandinka, the Pwele, these great clans of West Africa, their language was Arabic. And this is why we have Arabic manuscripts from slaves that came to America. They weren't writing in any of their local dialects. They were writing in Arabic. And we have proof and evidence of that. And these were not people whose first language was Arabic. They were educated West Africans who were captured unjustly and brought to the Americas as slaves. And in the Bahia Revolt in Brazil, in the 1830s, their language of correspondence was Arabic. And this made it very difficult for the Portuguese because they didn't know Arabic. So these slaves that were revolting against their unjust captivity, their code language was Arabic. So, and then if you look at the Berber peoples of North Africa, the Berbers became bilingual. And this is why even today, the Berbers who speak Shulha, they also speak Arabic. The Tuareg, when I went to the Tuareg lands, I met many, many Tuareg. They all spoke Arabic, even though Tamashek is their language. But they all spoke Arabic because wherever Islam went, Arabic went with it. This was our lingua franca. And we have to revive Arabic as a language that binds us. We're bound now by English. This is the dominant language because the dominant culture speaks English. It's a hegemonic culture. Its media has had massive influence. I've met many, many Arabs from Gulf states who speak much better English than they speak Arabic. And this is a crisis. And I would argue that Arabic is going to be a dead language if things continue as they're going. It will become like Latin because it's a very difficult language to master. And one of the interesting things about modern Arabs, and I really believe that a lot of the problems in the Arab world is because of the Darija. Because the Darija is like Ebonics. Ebonics is a very rich cultural language of African Americans, but Ebonics will limit people's abilities. It's as simple as that. And that's why a culture that wants to keep a people oppressed will leave them in their provincial languages. They won't educate them out of those languages. They will keep them oppressed. And so it's very important. And that's why you find educated African Americans that came out of inner cities are bilingual. They speak the language of the inner city where they grew up, and then they speak what they call the job interview language, right? Which is how to speak in good English. But if you look at Malcolm, Malcolm spoke beautiful English. And the first thing he learned was diction, which is proper word choice, which diction is almost a lost art now because people don't know the meanings and the subtle differences, what's called fiqh al-lugha in the Arabic language, the subtle differences between words and why we would choose one word over another word to mean something very specific. Because precision, if we want to communicate, it demands that we be as precise as possible. And in order for the ambiguities to be removed. In logic, when we use terms, the first and most important thing about terms is that they're clear and unambiguous. In other words, that we define our terms. So that when we speak, if I say democracy, I know the genus is government, right? And I know that the difference is of, for, and by the people, right? So there's a definition. That's a working definition of democracy. Obviously, there are other definitions. If I say monarchy, then it's a form of government, and what distinguishes it is that the head of the government is a hereditary line, a family line. That's a monarchy. And then a dictator, the genus is government. The form is an individual who has absolute power. So these are, when I'm talking about democracy, we cannot call, for instance, a lot of the governments today that are called democracies are not of, for, and by the people. They're of, for, and by the corporations. So this becomes important in terms of understanding when we speak the words that we're using and what they're communicating. It's very important. So diction was traditionally taught. And that's why the first major discipline of the human being is the acquisition of words, their correct meanings. Knowing 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because words have different meanings in context. I'll give you an example. I read a translation of an Arabic book in which the person translated in every sentence that the word qiyas was used, he translated as syllogism. And it was a completely inaccurate translation because qiyas means syllogism, but it also means reasoning. It means it can mean analogical reasoning. There's different types of qiyas, istintaj, istiqra, tamthil. These are different types of qiyas. And you'll only know this by the context of the sentences. And this is where domain knowledge becomes incredibly important and very difficult for people, because domain knowledge takes a long time to acquire. One of the things that my sister was criticized for was having books of Greek and Roman mythology in her curriculum for children. If you want to understand Western literature, you have to know Greek and Roman mythology. At some point or another, you will have to know Greek and Roman mythology, because it's very, very important. A lot of metaphors, a lot of words are taken out of these. I mean, people don't know cereal comes from Ceres, which was the god of grain in the Romans. So the word cereal is honoring the god of grain, Ceres, right? So this is part. If you don't know Mars, Mars is the god of war, you won't understand all these references that you'll find. If you want to read Shakespeare, there are a lot of things you have to understand about Elizabethan worldview, or you'll totally miss Shakespeare, because he was living in a transitional phase between the pre-modern world and the modern world. And the greatest statement of that is his play Hamlet. Now, you can say all this is irrelevant for me as a Muslim. That's fine. And you can relegate your tradition and say, I'm not interested in the Western tradition. That's fine. But you're living in Western civilization. You're living here in this world. And if you want to understand this world better, then you have to understand what informs the people that have the most power and influence in this world. And what informs them are these foundational texts that they have. This is what informs their culture. The Iliad is still an informative text about this civilization, the Iliad. And if you read somebody like Kagan or Victor Davis Hanson is a good example, who had, he was one of the intellectual lightning rods of the neoconservative movement during the whole war on Iraq and Afghanistan. He's a classicist. Robert Kagan. These people are drawing from classical literature. They're drawing from Herodotus. They're drawing from Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian War. It's a very important text in Western civilization. This is where they get their ideas from. We have our own civilization, but those amongst us who are called to be engaging, we have to be bilingual in two civilizations. And it's not easy to do that. It takes a great deal of work to get the domain knowledge. The domain knowledge to understand the average Islamic text written in the pre-modern world is immense. If you want to read a late 19th century book on Ilm al-Kalam, like Imam al-Bajuri assumes in his book on his sharh of Jawharat al-Tawheed, he assumes that you've studied mantiq, that you've studied nahw and sarf, that you've studied balagha, that you've studied arud. He makes an assumption that you've studied arud, because he'll explain to you in certain couplets in the poem, he'll explain to you why he's not repeating himself or this, that, or the other. So it's a multidisciplinary tradition. Interdisciplinary, the interdisciplinarian tradition that's emerged recently in the West is ridiculous. This idea that somehow it's a new thing. All of the pre-modern writers, whether they were European or African or Middle Eastern or Turkish or Indian, all of them were multidisciplinarian. They were polymaths. And this was our tradition. So it's hard work. But Arabic is fundamental to our tradition. You know, I actually just, I'm working on a course that I want to teach in one of the prisons in California. So I'm working with one of the imams. He's an imam in the prison on teaching grammar to largely African-American Muslims in the prison, because one of the things that prevents people from succeeding in just this incredibly mad world that we've inherited and are now participators in its perpetual or perpetuity is grammar. That because grammar empowers people. It's an empowering subject. And this is why nahu and sarf were so important in the Islamic tradition. And this is why almost immediately, if you know Arabic, you can determine a person's level of education after a few sentences in the Arabic world. And you will see that the people that have the most influence in putting forward their opinions are the people that are the most articulate. This is a simple fact. Now, you do have a phenomenon where ulama would move in and out of fusha and darija. Imam Sha'rawi is a good example of that, the mufassir from Egypt. But he knew that there were amma in the audience where fusha was not as accessible to them. And so he would dip into the darija. And that is a tradition. But what we should be working on is getting people out of darija into proper Arabic. And it takes a long time. And this is one of Shaykh Abdullah's, he considers it very important. And so when you look at the malfuz, he said that the sharia is taken from three sources. It's taken from al-qawl, so all of our fiqh that is derived is taken from three sources. Obviously we have the book and the sunnah, but how are we working with it? It's taken from his qawl, what the Prophet said, and that's always over what he did or what he agreed on. That's over. The highest source is the Quran and the hadith. And then the hadith obviously has many categories, the highest being mutawatir, and then sahih, that is in the 6 books, sahih and Bukhari and Muslim, muttafaq alayh, and then so on and so forth. And then you have the fi'l, which is the Prophet's actions, what he did. And then you have to determine why he did them. Are they just natural acts that he did, that Arabs did, so they're part of his culture, so he did them. For instance, he ate with his hand, which was part of the tradition of his people, but he didn't eat with the whole hand. He ate only with the 2 fingers and the thumb. And so if you're going to eat with your hands, then you should eat that way, not with the whole hand. That's the sunnah. But that does not mean that you can't eat with a spoon. Wooden spoons are better than metal spoons. And traditionally, wooden spoons were what were used. In fact, if you want the shifa of honey, you should always give it in a wooden spoon and not in a metal spoon. And we know, metal, we don't know how much metal is affecting us, the anions that come off of metal. But we know that people benefit, for instance, from cooking with copper, right? And they get iron. So we know that metal is coming into our bodies, and there's a lot of metal now out there that's very harmful for people. We know mercury, lead, paint, all these things. There's also the nincompoop theory of the decline and fall of Roman civilization that argues that it was the lead pipes that they started using for their plumbing, which gave them plumbum, right? Plumbum, right? Is lead on the chemical table or the table of elements. So plumbing used to be, it was lead pipes. So they were drinking water from lead. The lead was getting in the water, and lead will make you stupid. And so that's the nincompoop theory of how they literally ended up declining and falling. So the most important one is the word, and then the fi'l, what the Prophet ﷺ did. And then he did things because they were wajib. He did things because they were mandub. Sometimes he did things because they were simply mubah. His niyya was always, would elevate it to mandub or wajib. And then he did things that were makruh in order to show, رُبَّمَا يَفَعُلُ الْمَكْرُوهِ مُبَيِّنٌ أَنُهُ لِلتَّنْزِيهِ. Sometimes he will do something that's makruh to show that it's for tanzih, that it's simply, it's not haram, like urinating standing up for men. He did that on rare occasion to show the men that it was permissible, because there might be times where it's difficult not to do that. So that's like just making it easier for people, because makruh is not sinful, but you're rewarded if you don't do it. But he never did anything haram, ever, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So those are the 5 categories. And now, This is very important. The Sharia, all of it goes back to kalam. And all of this kalam, this speech, is in the Arabic tongue. Whether it is expressed by the Prophet ﷺ or it's a story that was told of something he did or something he agreed to or saw it done and consented to it. So what he consents to is part of the sunnah can come out of that. Or he says, بِاعْتِبَارٍ آخر, in another way of expressing this, that الذي يتعامل مع النصوص الشرعية لاستخراج الأحكام وتقرير المسائل فإنه يتعامل معها على أساسين لا ثالث لهما. This is really important. In other words, we engage the nusus, the text of this Sharia, in order to derive rulings from it and to come to some determinations about new issues. There are two foundations. One of them is the nusus and the other is the maqasid. So this is the whole foundation of Sharia. What the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. The letter of the law is in the nusus, the spirit of the law is in the maqasid. And these are the two things that the faqih is working with. The letter of the law, which sometimes does killeth, right? To put it in the words of the New Testament, right? The letter killeth and the spirit giveth life. In other words, if you don't understand the maqasid, and this gets back to metaphysics, if you don't understand the metaphysics, which is really what the qasid are about, then you kill, the literalism will kill you. It will kill the religion. It will kill it. And this is what's happening, why so many Muslims' hearts are dying, because they've lost the maqasid. They've lost a real deep understanding of what this Sharia is for, what it is about. It's not about punishing people and humiliating people. It's about tawbah. It's about bringing people back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's about making people love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not hate God. The fear of God is an awe of God in the same way that the child fears the parent. It doesn't fear the parent out of an idea that the parent hates it or wants to punish it. No, it fears the parent and it doesn't want to disappoint the parent out of love. So the fear of the parent is actually really love of the parent. And so the fear of Allah should be from love of God, not because God is some horrible tyrant, a'udhu billah, some petulant, tribal deity that needs sacrifices to be appeased. It's not our Lord. Our Lord is Al-Wadud. He's Al-Jamil. He's Dhul Jalali wal Ikram. He's majestic, Azza wa Jalla. He is. But he's Halim, he's Kareem, he's Sabur, he's Mu'min. These are the qualities. And that's why he has beautiful names that they're all, his asma are husna. All of them are beautiful. Even though some of them have majestic tajalliyat, manifestations, but all of his names are beautiful because Allah is Jameel, Yuhibbul Jamal. So this is really important. Now the maqasid do not need language to be understood. The nusus, they're only understood through language. The maqasid are intellectual conceptualizations. They're articulated through language, but they're understood intellectually. In other words, it's wisdom. It's hikmah. And this is the highest of the intellectual virtues. You have the aql, you have the ilm, and then you have hikmah. The aql is the foundation of the intellect. It's the intuitive intellect, the nous. It's what understands things. It has immediate comprehension. The ilm is what is learned and acquired. And then hikmah it's when the aql and the ilm are working together, then hikmah arises. It's the art and the science, right? It's the art and the science. Prudence is the practical aspect of hikmah in Western tradition. The Arabs did not differentiate between intellectual wisdom, intellectual in the pre-modern sense of that word, not the modern sense, and prudence. They didn't distinguish between those two. But in the West they did. They made a distinction between prudence and wisdom. Although it's the only, in the Western classification and in the Muslim classification, it's the only virtue that is both moral and intellectual. It's the only one that shares in the moral virtues, and those are the virtues of will, of behavior, and in the intellectual virtues, the virtues of understanding. So prudence is in both, hikmah. And so this is what's needed. And this is jalb al-masalih wa dar al-mafasid. So ma'quliyat al-nas, right? The hikmah of the tashri' is what's called ma'quliyat al-nas. Why? What's the intelligibility of the nas? What do we understand from it? You have ma'qul al-nas, right? And then there's certain things that Allah has hidden the wisdom from us. But we know that it's ma'qul. It's just Allah has hidden that from us. And this is done ta'abudan. This is done out of devotion. So there are certain things like we do not know why there are 3 rak'ats for maghrib. But there's a reason. We don't know why there's 2 for fajr, but there's a reason. We don't know why there's 4 for dhuhr and 4 for asr. We don't know why those times specifically, but there's reasons. Part of it might be that it's really important to get up at dawn when there's certain hormones in the brain that are peaking. Your cortisol levels peak at about that time. We don't know. That might be part of it, because there are health benefits to the practices that we do. There are health benefits to prayer, physically. There are health benefits to tafakkur, to doing meditation. But that's not the highest wisdom in these things. The highest wisdom is all that inner directedness towards Allah, to get us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is really important now. So all of it goes back to jalb al-masalih wa dar al-mafasid. This is the essence of the maqasid. To accrue benefit for human beings and to ward off harm. And warding off harm is always put before accruing benefit. Warding off harm is always yuqaddam dar'ul mafasid ala jalb al-masalih. So whenever something's harmful, you override other things. And our sharia is beautiful. I'll give you an example. In the sharia, if you're in the mosque praying and somebody is stealing your shoes, I mean, if you have husn al-dhan, you might think that they just mistakenly. But if it looks like a thief, right, and you're in the prayer, it is permitted to leave the prayer and go and stop that thief. Now, why? Why would Allah permit that? Because normally deen, in the 6 universals, deen is over preservation of property. Preservation of religion is over preservation of property. Because there's poor people that those shoes are everything to them. There's people that he might have just saved up months to get a brand new pair of good shoes, and they're important to him. And so Allah lets him preserve his property by leaving the haqq of Allah for the haqq of the abd. This is rahmah. Somebody who's wealthy, Allahu Akbar, they might not even, who cares? And you can have the shoes. Maybe he needs them more than I do. Yatasaddaqu, like Abu Damdam. You just give him as sadaqah. Abu Yazid al-Bustami. So, and then he said, these are the foundations of ijtihad. And there are many proofs for this. So you go into qiyas, istihsan, sadd al-dhara'i', masalih al-mursala, allati tanbani ala al-maqasid. All of these are based on the maqasid. And there are 3. The daruriyat, the hajiyat, and the tahsiniyat. So this is the triage of the usuli scholar. They look at the necessities, they look at the needs of humans, and they look at the embellishments of life. Those things that make life enjoyable. Because Allah wants us also to enjoy our lives. He created us. مَا أَنزَلْنَا الْقُرْآنَ عَلَيْكَ لِتَشْقَى. We didn't reveal this Quran so you'd be miserable. مَفْهُومًا مُخَالَفًا لِتَسْعَدْ. We revealed it for you to be happy. So the فرحنا وبذلك فليفرحوا هو خير مما يجمعون. Let them rejoice in this. It's better than all that, those trappings out there. Right? And Allah says, don't prohibit those embellishments of the world that Allah brought forth for His servants, right? Kulu wa sharabu. Eat and drink. Ibaha, eat and drink. I mean, obviously you have to do it to preserve your life. That's an obligation. But you can also eat and drink to enjoy. Ice cream has no benefit. Really? I mean, very little, but more harm than benefit. But it's not haram to eat a lot where you're harming your health. But every once in a while, baklava, right? Yeah, Allah put these things in the world. But the problem is when they become the overriding purpose. Socrates once, somebody asked him, how did you become so wise and everybody else so foolish? He said, I don't know about that, but I know one difference between you and me is that I eat to live and you live to eat. And there's a lot of people out there digging their graves with their teeth. Really, there are a lot of people out there digging their graves. And obesity is a major problem on the planet. There's so much overeating. You only need 1,600 to 2,000. I mean, rarely you get these, people that might need more than that. But that's basically what you need. We know how much food you need. Anything that's excess of that is going to become harmful and cumbersome. It's going to weigh you down and make you sick. So the darurat are the necessities. And the necessities are actually very few. You need, for instance, food and drink. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which our Prophet ﷺ perfectly articulated long before Maslow in the hadith, his first khutbah in Medina, right? Where he said, أَطْعِمُ الطَّعَامِ, feed food, right? أَفْشُوا السَّلَامِ وَأَطْعِمُوا الطَّعَامِ وَصَلُّوا بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٌ تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ بِالسَّلَامِ. He said, create security, spread peace. That's security. That's the base in Maslow's needs. Security. أَطْعِمُوا الطَّعَامِ, feed people. Next one, you have security, food, and then self-realization, right? Pray. Your purpose in life, which is to worship Allah. That's the fundamental purpose of life. So find purpose and meaning in life. So, and this is again in فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ الَّذِي يَطْعَمُهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. Worship your Lord, the Lord of this house, who fed you and gave you security. Once you have the baseline of food and security, devotion. You have to have devotion. So those are the darurat. Right? That's the basic security. We have security needs, and then we have our basic food, clothing, shelter, those types. And they're very minimal. I lived with Bedouins, so I know how little. And Zaytuna, our campus is next to one of the largest homeless communities in America, which is People's Park in Berkeley. And when I was interviewed by CNN, they said, why did you choose this? I said, well, we've got the largest homeless community next to us, so nobody can say when the Muslims moved in, there goes the neighborhood. Right. So, homeless people do fine without all these, right, accoutrements of life, the embellishments. But hajiyat are the next. The hajiyat are those things that they're not necessary, but they're important. Some of the usuli scholars use the house as the house is necessary, but windows are hajat. You have to have windows. The door is necessary to get in and out of the house, but windows you need them to keep the house, bring light into the house, bring fresh air into the house, all those things. So that's a haja. And then the takmiliyat are the embellishments. That's the furniture in the house. You don't need furniture. It's not a need and it's not a necessity. You can sleep on the floor. You don't need a bed. You can sleep on the floor. Right? The earth is a firash. The earth, Allah made the earth a bed. So people sleep on the earth. But those are, and that's why if you look, for instance, in Sharia, preservation of life is a darura. So if you go to the doctor so you've got pain, to remove that pain is a haja, right? I mean, it might not be a darura, it might be, the doctor needs to determine that. Because it could be something you could live with, right? But it could be something that will harm you. So a woman, the hijab is from the tahsiniyat. It's not from the darurat or the hajiyat. I mean, this is very interesting because people don't realize this. In usul, the hijab, the covering our nakedness, is considered from the tahsiniyat. And Aboriginal peoples walk around almost naked. So it's neither a necessity or a need, but it's an embellishment. It's wajib. I'm not going to say it's not wajib, but the usuli scholars put it in the tahsiniyat. And this is why for a need you can remove the hijab to the doctor. Because in the triage of things, the need overrides the embellishment. So if you have a need, if you've got something and the doctor needs to see your nakedness or check the woman's breast to see if there's lumps or something like that, that's permissible. Why? Because of this triaging. So this is how the usuli scholars look at these things. Now I want two points that he brings out that I think are very important. I mean, all these points are important, but these are very interesting. Ibn Ya'ish mentions in his Sharh of the Mufassal that the Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he was the caliph, he got a letter from Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. And Abu Musa was a qadi in Kufa. Al-Kufa is a place in Iraq, city in Iraq. It's a great city of knowledge. And the letter he got from him was written by a scribe. And the scribe wrote, Min Abu Musa ila Amir al-Mu'mineen. From Abu Musa to the Amir al-Mu'mineen. But he didn't write Min Abi Musa. He wrote Min Abu Musa. Now min in Arabic is called harf jar. It's a preposition, so anything that follows it is an object of the preposition, and therefore it's considered majroor. And then Abu is from the asma al-khamsa or sitta, if you add, Ibn Malik adds a sixth. So you have like abuka, right? Akhuka. You have these fuka, dumal, and these, when you put a harf jar there, then they have to have a kasra to indicate that they're majroor. So it should have said min Abi Musa, not min Abu Musa. But he wrote min Abu Musa ila Amir al-Mu'mineen, and he made the Abu marfu', because the waw is the primary alama or sign of the nominative case if you use English grammar terms. وكان لأبي موسى كاتب لا يحسن اللغة. He wasn't good at Arabic. لم يضع الياء علامة على الجر موضع الواو. So he didn't put the ya as a sign that it was in the genitive case. And so what did Omar do? He got angry. لفت انتباهه هذا اللحن. So this bad grammar caught his attention. And he got upset. And he says, وَلَعَلُّ اخْتَاضَ لِلْعَوَاقِبِ الَّتِي سَتَحِيقُ بِهَذِهِ اللُّغَةِ. What made him upset or angry was the effects that bad grammar will have. It wasn't the actual, it's a minor mistake, it's not a big deal. But he's looking down the road. This is called نَظَرْ لِلْمَآلَاتِ. What are the consequences if this becomes widespread? And so he wrote back, and he said, Ila Abi Musa, and he commanded him to flog his secretary once and to remove him from his position. People say, wow, it's pretty harsh for a grammatical mistake. Man, that makes like the unhappy face on the, when your teacher gives you a little bad grammar, puts a little unhappy face on the side. Right? Feel better about your teachers. That wasn't Omar. إنه تأديب شديد يلحق بموظف فينهي خدمته. This is a harsh disciplinary action that he gave to this employee and ended his employment. Right? ويمصه بلهيب الصوت, and then he gave him the harshness of the whip. من إمام ملأ الدنيا عدلا. This is from an imam who filled the world with justice. وبذ الحكام فضلا. Right? He surpassed all these حكام in virtue. هل انتهكت حرمة الشريعة انتهكت حرمة الشريعة حتى يغضب عمر? Was the Sharia, the sanctity of the Sharia, so affected that Umar gets angry in this way? هل حدثت بدعة في الدين? Is this a bid'ah that occurred in the religion? حتى يرفع الصوت, that he would raise the صوت. حقا إن تلك المعاني لم تكن غائبة عن ذهن عمر. In reality, these are the meanings that were not far from the mind of Umar. فعلاقة الشريعة باللغة أكيدة, because the relationship of the Sharia to language is absolute. والابتداع قادم إذا لم تستقيم الألسنة والأقلام. And bid'ah comes out. All of the mistakes in the history of Islam, all of the mistakes that these deviant sects made in the Quran and the Sunnah, most of them go back to their lack of knowledge in balagha. Literally. Some of them to their lack of knowledge in Arabic. All of them. And so what Omar saw was, if this becomes widespread, we'll lose the foundation of our religion, which is language. And this is something the modern world, it's very troubling, because we're losing the ability to communicate. Private languages are emerging. We have a whole generation of youth that speak in private languages. We can't understand them. They speak in acronyms. They use words that we don't know what they mean. They invert words, so bad becomes good, right? Hot becomes cool. La ilaha illallah. Now, another example of that is from Umar, from Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He was once مر برجل يقال له أبو لفاقة في يده ثوب. He was carrying a garment, and Abu Bakr was a garment merchant. فقال له الصديق رضي الله تعالى عنه أتبيع هذا الثوب? Are you going to sell this robe? And the man said, لا رحمك الله. No, may God have mercy on you. What did Abu Bakr say? قد قومت ألسنتكم لو تستقيمون. Had you been morally upright, your tongues would have been grammatically correct. It's a very deep metaphysical statement. This is a very deep metaphysical statement. Had you been morally upright, your tongues would have been grammatically correct. In other words, the corruption of the language only occurs with the corruption, with a metaphysical corruption that precedes it. And that's why language is at the root of the problem on the planet. Literally. It is at the root of the problem. Now, why did he say that? Well, the reason for that is, in Arabic you have two types of sentences. You have what are called khabariya, which is indicative, and then you have an insha'iyya, which in English we divide them into several categories, but it's basically a subjective sentence, like an optative, an interrogative sentence. If you ask somebody like, where are you going, or how are you doing? Those are all forms, subjective sentences. Whereas if you have a khabariya, it's indicative. It's a categorical statement. It's raining. That's khabariya, jumla khabariya, right? You can go outside and see whether it's true or false. So when he said, "Atabi'u hada," are you selling this? That was a question. That's an insha'iyya, but it demands a khabariya, right? So it's an interrogative sentence that demands an indicative response, either yes or no or maybe. When he said no, he followed it with a dua. A dua is not a khabariya, it's insha'iyya. But it's, when we make dua in Arabic, we usually use the past tense, which is khabariya. Rahimukallah, God has had mercy on you. But the reason we use the form of the khabariya is because it's out of hope that God has already forgiven you. So we use the past tense because it's rahimukallah, as if it's already happened. But what you're really saying is, may God forgive you. So when he said la, khabariya, indicative, and then he said an optative statement, rahimukallah, may God have mercy on you. It's a wish. So he said, may God have mercy on you. He didn't divide it with a fasl. He didn't put an istitnaf there. He didn't put a wow, which would indicate that they're separate. He put them together, and that could make you think that he's saying, may God not have mercy on you. So Abu Bakr was correcting his grammar. Now, what does Shaykh Abdullah say about this? He says, this indicates that the caliph should be concerned about the grammar of his population. Whoever the ruler is, he should be concerned about the grammar of his population. And this is something that Muslims were obsessed with, really. There are so many books on grammar and language. And no community in the human history ever served language like the Muslims did. The dictionaries we have are by far the best dictionaries in human history. Muslims were writing dictionaries long before any other civilization wrote scientific dictionaries. The Europeans didn't start. In English, we don't have a dictionary from Shakespeare's period. There's no dictionary from Elizabethan English. There's no dictionary. I mean, Johnson's dictionary is the first dictionary, 18th century, in English. It's the first dictionary, and it's an interesting dictionary, but it's not anywhere near as sophisticated as the early Muslim dictionaries. Our first dictionary was incredibly sophisticated. Al-Ain, it's amazing. Al-Khalil, it's an amazing dictionary. And then if you look at Lisan al-Arab, beyond belief. Taj al-Arus, amazing. There's something that Abu Bakr al-Razi does in his Mukhtar al-Sihah, because there's a famous dictionary called Sihah. And then Mukhtar al-Sihah, which is the one I used when I was a student all the time. I would look up a word and he'd say, ma'loom. Like everybody knows that. That was his definition. In other words, listen, dummy, if you're having to look up this word, you're not ready for this dictionary. Yeah. So, and using words is important, right? My father told me a story about Van Doren, who was his teacher. Mark Van Doren at the University of Columbia. And my father read with him Don Quixote. It was a literature course. And, you know, he was 19 or 20. And he met him in the hall, and he said, Dr. Van Doren, I think I understand what Don Quixote is doing in that book. And he said, really, what do you think he's doing? And he said, I think it's a satire of the New Testament. And Van Doren looked at me, he said, do you mean parody? And my dad just said, that shut me up for the next year. Like he just, you know. In other words, it's a great gift to be shown your ignorance and to recognize it. If you're going to use a word, at least know what it means. Right? Because there's a difference between satire and parody. And my father did not know that distinction at the time. So if you want to judge a book, you better have the tools to judge it. You know, Chesterton, who they called the English Socrates, G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton was probably one of the most brilliant Europeans of the 20th century, but he was a devout Catholic, or maybe High Anglican. Anyway, he was a devout Orthodox Christian. C.S. Lewis, who had a huge impact on Christianity, C.S. Lewis, when he first met him, it was Chesterton that restored Lewis's faith. And the reason for that is because he said, if a man this intelligent can believe in God, because he was an atheist at the time, Lewis, not Chesterton. He said, if a man this intelligent could believe in God, I must be missing something. I need to look more deeply into this. Like the man who said, you know, his neighbor, they were gardening and they got to know each other, and he asked him what he did. He said he was a theologian. And his neighbor said, this is a true story that an English Muslim told me. He said that, oh, you're an atheist. Have you read, he was Christian, so have you read Saint Gregory? He said, no. He said, have you read Augustine? He said, no. He said, have you read Aquinas on belief? He said, no. He said, sir, you're not an atheist, you are an ignoramus. So, and that gets back to, you know, Chesterton really, when brilliant people believe in God, it should strengthen your iman. Because a lot of these so-called atheists today want to say that only stupid people believe in God, right? But the most brilliant people in human history have believed in God. Newton wrote a commentary on the Bible that he considered more important than all the works he did in science. So anyway, Chesterton, when he first met Lewis said they were meeting in Surrey, and he said, I didn't expect the flora here to be so wild. And Chesterton looked at me, he said, what do you mean by wild, sir? You know? And then he said, and why wouldn't you expect it to be that? And Lewis was taken aback by it, and then he said, the assumption here is that you've read something about the geography of Surrey that would lead you to conclude that it shouldn't be so wild. You know, he said, I don't know anything about Surrey. And he said, then why would you expect it to be anything? Right? Yeah. You know, we should all just shut up, really. Really, we should all just shut up. That's the truth. Yeah. That's what Wittgenstein did at the end of his life. And, you know, I was once in Mauritania. This is a true story. And there were these two little girls, and one of them just talked all the time. The other one never said anything. And I remarked to one of my teachers, at the time he was actually younger than me, but he became a great scholar. And I said to him, I said, SubhanAllah, هذه عاقلة, you know, she's so intelligent. He said, نعم, عاقلة. And I said, I mean, her language skills are amazing at that age. He said, تعني المتكلمة? You're talking about the one talking? I said, yeah. He said, I thought you meant the silent one, yeah. And then he said, عندنا السكوت علامة الذكاء. He said that silence is a sign of intelligence in our culture. Yeah. It was really interesting to see that. So, let me finish up here, and then I think... Now, what's interesting is Imam Ali founded grammar. Isn't that fascinating? Imam Ali, because Abu Aswad al-Du'ali came to him. He was with his daughter, and they were looking at the stars, and she said, "Ma ahsana as-sama' ya baba." And she made it majroor, right? And it should have been ma ahsana as-sama'a, because what she wanted was amazement, right? So it would have been mansoob. And he said, an-nujum, like, because she asked it like, what's the most beautiful thing in heaven? She meant to say, oh, how beautiful the heavens are. But she said it like, what's the most beautiful thing in heaven? Ma ahsanu as-sama'i ya baba. And he realized that she made a grammatical mistake. He got distressed by it. So he went to his teacher, Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu, and told him, and Sayyidina Ali said, you should dawwan al-Arabiya. And he said, Inna al-Arabiyyata thalath. Arabic is three things. Ismun wa fi'lun wa harfun. Fanahwu hadha an-nahwu. He said it's nouns, or what we would call, because in traditional grammar, even in English, they adjectives were put with attributives, and substantives were put together. So adjectives used to be one part of speech, adjectives and nouns, because they're descriptive of a substance. And so they were put together. So the ism in Arabic, ismul sifa, is an adjective. So it's put together with the nouns, even though we distinguish it in the 8 parts of speech in English. But he said, language is 3 things: substantives, right? And then the verbs, fi'lun. So you have the substantive, which is either an accident, a property, or it's the thing itself, or it's an action, or it's a word that facilitates meaning of those other 2. What we would call like prepositions, adverbs, all those type things. So and he said, so follow this path. Anhu hada nahu, and that's where we get the word nahu from this story. So that was how important he considered it to be. So let me just do the. I would have liked to. This is such an interesting book, and I would have liked to have gone into some other things, but time waits for no man. And he goes into mafhum Arabiyyat al-Sharia, the differences between Imam Malik and Shafi'i and Hanbali and Imam Abu Hanifa, because they differed on that, about is the Sharia Arabic or is it not? And Abu Hanifa inclined towards that it wasn't, that the Arabic was the vehicle, it could be transmitted through other vehicles. And the other 3 imams said, no, it's actually the vehicle that it's transmitted through is Arabic, and it really can't be transmitted through other vehicles. And they both have merit. And then he goes into, is language from God or is it conventional? And this is a very important debate. And then can Arabic be established by means of analogical reasoning or not? That's another debate. And then he goes into dalalat al-alfaz, which are all of these different ways of interpreting the meanings, the mutabaqa, the tadammun, the iltizam, what things correspond to, what's included in their meaning, and then what they indicate. And then he goes into mantuq and mafhum. He goes into the haqiqa. I talked about those, the urfiyya, the shar'iyya, and the wad'iyya, and the majaz. We talked about that yesterday. And then he goes into the nas, the muhkam, right, of the mantuq, which is the nas, dilalat al-iqtida, dilalat al-ishara, dilalat al-ima, and then the mafhum, which is the muwafaqa and the mukhalafa. And then he goes into the problems of the mubayyin, the mu'awwal, what's clarifying, what needs to be interpreted, the khas, the am, what's specific, what's general, the muqayyad, the mutlaq, what's absolute and what is constrained, al-amr wa nahi, the commands and the prohibitions, the kulli and the juz'i, the universal and the particular, right? The al-muwati and the mushakkik, the one that corresponds and the one that puts doubt, the mushtarak and the mutaradif, things that have shared meaning, and then things that are synonymous. So these are all the dilalat that have to be learned by the scholar before they can really navigate the text. And it takes work. It's hard work, but it's certainly possible. So I think they're going to show you the film, and then I'll just make a plea. So go ahead if you want to show that. We're living in a time where people associate Boko Haram with Islam. We're living at a time when people don't think of Imam al-Ghazali or Fakhruddin or Razi or all of these great giants that went before us. They think of ignorant people, and too many people believe that this is Islam. And that's why we're here. That's what this is about. This is about restoring the centrality of knowledge to our religion. The centrality of knowledge to our religion.
Education doesn't just educate the intellect. No, education is a much more dynamic and holistic, integrative thing. It's an integrative process that helps to integrate the various parts. So if an education does not have anything to do with the spirit of the human being, if it has nothing to do with the psyche of the human being, then it's not, according to Mark Van Doren, really education. This course is to help them map the next 4 years of their education and to think really deeply about what it is that this whole Zaytuna curriculum does and will do, and what they will do with it.
This reading has me on the verge of tears, and it was after reading this quote, and it ties back to what it was that you had just said in reference to the works that we've been engaged in up until this point. They've challenged us, spiritually, they've challenged us intellectually, they've challenged me in ways I've never been challenged before. But Mark Van Doren later on goes to say that the main thing is that there are powers within the person which liberal education and only liberal education can free for use. And, this might not mean much to you guys, but it meant a lot to me. I've never really been able to tap into the side of me that this course and that this school has allowed me to tap into.
ذلك هو العنوان، عنوان جميل، زيتونة في الغرب لكنها تحمل مضامين الفضيلة من الشرق وتحمل مضمون العمل من الغرب أيضا.
وأصل القدر سر الله تعالى في خلقه. The essence, right? The foundation, the basis of the divine decree is God's secret within creation. This is Allah's secret. How is it that I can choose on my own accord, but that's in perfect harmony and alignment with a pre-eternal decision, God's pre-eternal decision? It's a secret. It's Allah's secret, and we're not privy to it. We do not have access to that. That the mind has limits, and this is well beyond the limits of the human intellect. You have to do sajda with the qadr. Does that make sense? The mind has to make a sajda.
After taking Theology 1 and Theology 2, it makes complete sense why comparative religions is the third thing that you take. Because you get Theology 1 and Theology 2 to gain a strong grounding in your own beliefs. And then taking that and running with it and then studying like Hinduism and Confucianism and Jainism and Taoism and Christianity and Judaism, you really realize how similar a lot of them are, but how unique your own tradition is. I can look at these other traditions, I can take whatever wisdom I need, but at the same time be strong in my own faith.
Man is an angelic being. So let's say man is an angelic being. And you would say, no, it isn't, no, it isn't, no, it isn't. You say, yes, it is. Well, obviously you're not going to solve that. You're not going to resolve that argument there on the street. But you will say that no human being is an angelic creature. So what are you doing? You're saying absolutely no member of the species man, right, is an angelic creature. So you're absolutely separating the predicate angelic creature from the concept man.
This whole idea of being a better person or a better individual or refining our souls, it's not just in Islam. It's in so many other traditions that came before, and I think because we're not exposed to it. And so I think it's amazing because that's where you get your philosophy class. That's where your philosophy class comes in. That's where your logic class comes in. All the Western tradition is so important because it's similar to our tradition. I think that's saying a lot, is that we don't just reject things that we don't know, because you don't know what could be in that is good for you.
So many questions I have about certain things, Western philosophy doesn't have the answers to, but if you understand Aqidah, if you understand the Islamic scholarly tradition of theology, and you understand those arguments, then all of a sudden, some of those questions that were so perplexing before, now you have a clear answer. And it's not like it's a dogmatic answer, it actually makes sense rationally.
The most important and difficult thing is to continue to preserve the authenticity of your Islamic roots. And I would not mean only by that the daily prayers. That's very, very important, of course. I do not mean by that only Islamic ethics. That's also very, very important. But I mean by that also to preserve a mental ambience which is Islamic, in which the realities of Islam can be breathed.
If we don't have committed, knowledgeable, and fearless Muslim youth, we don't have Islam. We have some perversion of Islam. So this is the torchbearer here, Zaytuna. Let there rise among you, right? A group enjoining good and forbidding wrong. And let them start here. They start here in Zaytuna, and then they spread. So that's to me, the ultimate benefit of Zaytuna is that it is a vehicle for sustaining the life of the human spirit.
So, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, we started this college really with a lot of trust, and we did it in many ways in the reverse way in which colleges are started, because colleges usually start with an endowment, and they build from that endowment. We did not start with an endowment, so we're trying to build an endowment. But one of the issues that we face on a constant basis is budgetary restrictions and crises. So that's the mode. And inshallah, we're very close to accreditation. We had a glowing WASC report that's going to be put up on the online, because we had the site visit. They have 39 criteria that you have to fulfill to get accreditation. What accreditation means, if we get it, inshallah, we're hoping to get it this year or next year. We're on the verge of 2015. But it means that we can take Canadian students, they can get the visas that they need to study, student visas. We can take foreign students, even from the Muslim world, because we've had many people from Turkey, even from the Middle East, that have wanted to study there. So we're expanding, and we need a lot of help to build this. But this has to be seen as, it's a project that concerns the ummah, because we do not have an academic address in the West. Muslims do not have an academic address in the West that's accredited, because one of the things that we get when we're accredited is an EDU. We get an actual academic address for the Muslims, which is to get the edu.org, which is an educational email that Harvard has. So if you get a letter from a Harvard professor, it's usually on edu.org, right, at Harvard. So that is a major step, I think, for our community that we need to fulfill. But we need your help. We have a program which is 12,000 strong, taken from the hadith that the Prophet said 12,000 people working with one heart won't be defeated for lack of numbers. If they don't succeed, it's for other reasons. But it won't be for lack of numbers. So we're asking for 12,000 people. We've probably got about 1,200. Some of you already. How many people in here are already doing that? So alhamdulillah, there's some people, but a lot more is needed. And we're really hoping that people will step up. We're asking for $1 a day. Give us a couple years commitment, 4 or 5 years, whatever you can do, if you're able to. But it's literally, it's less than a latte. People go every day, spend $4 on a latte or something like that. It's, we're asking for a little bit of sacrifice or help from our community. It's not much. That's really all we're asking for is $1 a day. If you want to give more, that's fine, but we're asking for a $30 a month commitment to, do every month. So that's the hope that people will do that. There's a booth at the bazaar if you want to sign up, but I really hope that you do that. I think it's an excellent project that we hope to develop more. I literally just had a major foundation come to me. They asked for a meeting with me, the major foundation. And these are people, they're not Muslims. And they said, we want to help Zaytuna. It's amazing. So they're reaching out to me from a major foundation. They said, what you're doing is really important. There's a lot of ignorance about Islam. We're in a multicultural civilization. People have to have a better understanding. So we'd really like to find ways that we could work. We'd like you to write grants, if we can help with certain things. Now, this is a foundation it's a multi-billion-dollar foundation that a philanthropist did. And they have to give out a certain amount of money every year. So they actually, sometimes, by law, they have to give it out. And if they don't get enough grants, they go looking for people to give. But it's very ironic for me that people outside of our faith come to ask if they can help us. And it's like, we've got billionaires in the Muslim community. Like, where are they? It's a very strange time. It's really sad. But I'm not counting on the billionaires. I'm counting on the thousandaires. Seriously, I think there's a lot more barakah in just getting a lot of small donations from people that work hard for their money, and the money's halal. I had literally, this is a true story. I had somebody who was in derivatives in a hedge fund. They came, they wanted to help as a Muslim. I didn't want the money, didn't take the money. Because I don't want money from usury, from armaments, from alcohol, pornography. I don't want that money. Inna Allah tayyibun wa la yaqbalu illa tayyiba. Allah is pure and He only accepts what's pure. So I'd much rather have small donations from a lot of sincere Muslims that want to see this succeed for the ummah, really. I think, it's a lighthouse for people, give them some hope in some pretty dark times. The Muslims, they're gutted all over the world. Muslims are really gutted. They just, okay, what's next? So anyway, whatever you can do to help, jazakumullah khairan. Somebody said, I felt a wave of joy mingled with sadness when you mentioned that Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya got his PhD in Tunisia. I'm Tunisian. I find it heartbreaking that we don't learn about our legacy. What were his advisors? I don't know the advisors. Back in the early 60s, I would also like to highlight another crisis, changing fitrah of our kids. If you smile at kids, they don't smile back. If they're little, they're very often shy, which is a good thing. So they're just shy. That's a normal thing for children. Over-friendly little children to strangers is not a healthy time when you have so much stranger danger. Right? So, but children by their nature are sanguine. If you know about the humoral theory, their children are happy by nature. It's the world that will make you sad. The world that we've created, not that Allah created. But in terms of Tunisia, Tunisia has one of the greatest legacies of scholarship in Islamic history. I mean, the Zaytuna, we named Zaytuna after the Zaytuna of Tunisia. I mean, it's taken from the Quran. That's where they got it from Shajar min Shajarat Mubarakah. It's from a blessed tree, neither of the east or the west. In other words, of both, according to one tafsir. And I had, some of my teachers were Tunisian. Sheikh Shadiri Naifar, who was a great man, great Maliki scholar, a really truly great faqih, one of the last great scholars of Tunisia. Sheikh Uthman al-Hawaymadi, beautiful scholar that I knew. I actually met also the Imam of the Qarawiyyin, Sheikh Abdurrahman Khlayf, another amazing man. So, yeah, Tunisia. May Allah restore Zaytuna and bring it back to greatness. Inna Allah yahyi al-arda ba'da mawtiha. Allah can bring a dead earth back to life. So, in usul al-fiqh, is usul al-fiqh not as important as fiqh itself to inculcate the aqli personality we need for the next generation of intelligent ulama? Is it time to change the model of how we teach and actually train the next generation of scholars so they can meet the challenges of the likes of the transhumanists? Shouldn't we teach usul? Furu' is very important, and you should always learn furu' before usul. So it would seem in some ways it's putting the cart before the horse, because the usul is really the horse. But it's not, in that furu' is what we practice. It's very important to trust the scholars. We don't need any new madhabs. What we need is ijtihad from within the madhabs. There's nothing new that is needed. We don't need this renewal of usul al-fiqh to rewrite usul al-fiqh. We couldn't do it, first of all. I mean, these people had intellects that God bestowed upon them in that early period that are beyond comprehension in some ways. And they came all at the same time. So we don't need, our usul is very rich, our tradition is extremely rich, and everything's in there, but it has to be accessed. And that access means training, and that training takes a long time. Unfortunately, it's hard work. And it does take a long time. And learning Arabic, mastering Arabic is one of the major keys. And that in it of itself takes a long time. Dr. Nasr yesterday chided me for not learning Persian. And God knows I have actually tried to learn Persian on several occasions. Freydun Mujaddadi's here, and he can tell me, he can tell you that that's true. I actually had a great Persian scholar who offered to give me lessons and everything. But I told Dr. Nasr that my problem is I dove into the sea of Arabic, because you have the Arabian Sea and the Persian Sea. There's kind of a debate about what it's called. I said I dove into the Arabian Sea, and I've been drowning ever since. So it's just I haven't been able to get out, because I always think when I'm trying to learn something else, I could be learning more Arabic. Because Arabic doesn't end. It just does not end. And the subtleties of Arabic go on and on. But Arabic takes a long time to learn. Sarf is very difficult. Nahu is actually reasonably easy. It's pretty logical. And it's actually, the irregularities of Nahu are not that many. It's very logical, and you can learn it. There's not that many concepts in Nahu, but Sarf is a whole, ishtiqaq and Sarf, that's a whole other. And then also fiqh al-lugha, learning the meanings of words, and the meanings of words in context. I mean, if you just look, arada ya'ridu has so many meanings. It just has so many meanings in Arabic, and they mean very different things. Wajhun, face, has many meanings. It's used for many different meanings. It can mean aspect, it can mean, a quality, lots of things. And then the Arabs have a lot of idioms that take a long time to learn, like mal wajh, the water of the face, which is, it doesn't make any sense on the face of it, no pun intended, but, adhaba ma'a wajhihi, the Arabs say he dissipated the water of his face, which is something that happens to people when they live bad lives. They lose a type of clarity in their faces, the reflection that water enables to happen. Something bad happens to their faces. And so that's an idiom of Arabic that they use, La amliku sharwa naqir. And you'll see these come up in books. So that takes a long time. But I would say, the Arabs, the Arabs, the Mauritanians, they say, أهمها الفروع أهمها عقائد ثم فروع تصوف وآلة بها الشروع. The most important in knowledge is the aqidah. That's the most important. And Aqidah has a lot of metaphysical foundations. Like if you study Ilm al-Kalam, you will find a lot of metaphysics when you get into sophisticated theology. There's a great deal of metaphysics. And all of our great theologians were masters of metaphysics. All of them. Taftazani, Tusi, I mean truly great metaphysicians. And when you get into their books, we have many people at the level of Aquinas in the West. We have several mutakallimun that are at the level of Aquinas. And my father, who knows Aquinas very well, when I did a film on Ghazali and he watched the film, he got intrigued and he wanted to read some books. He said, is he translated? I said, yes. He said, could you get me some of his books? So I got him several of Ghazali's books and he read through them. And then he said to me, the West never produced a Ghazali. And I know his knowledge of the Western canon is very, very strong. So that statement to me holds a lot of weight. But that's what he said. He said that the West never produced a Ghazali. And it's sad that now people disparage Imam al-Ghazali's name. It's just tragic, just the ignorance of the time. And the Prophet said the end of time won't come until the later part of this community curses the first part of it. So that's one of the signs of the end of time, is that people will curse the earlier people. So you have to learn aqa'id, and then you have to learn furu' al-fiqh before usul. Usul is not, it's a fard kifaya, but furu' is fard ayn. And then you have to learn, tasawwuf means akhlaq. I mean, there's two types of tasawwuf. There's a metaphysical tasawwuf, which is very complicated, and it's like quantum mechanics. You're entering into a realm that just to be able to read those books and understand them takes a long, long time. But the tasawwuf that we need is the tasawwuf of akhlaq, and our ethics is generally in the books of tasawwuf. I mean, that's where the ethical tradition ended up in Islam. So you learn tahdhib al-nafs, how to rectify the faults of the self. I think Shaykh Mukhtar al-Mughrawi has been talking about these things from the hikam and these things. This is really the akhlaq of Islam, is in the books of tasawwuf. And nobody disagreed about that. Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Abdul Wahhab, all the people that they used to bash tasawwuf, all of them accepted that aspect of tasawwuf. What they were against was metaphysical Sufism. So Ibn Taymiyyah was against metaphysical Sufism. Ibn Abdul Wahhab was against that's true. But they were not against ethical tasawwuf. That's absolute fact. So that's tasawwuf al-akhlaq and tasawwuf al-adwaq. Those are the two types of tasawwuf. You know, the experiential tasawwuf, which is about states and stations of the heart, and the other one is about refining your character. So nobody disagrees about that. And Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah wrote a famous book on tasawwuf, which is his commentary of Abdullah al-Ansari, Khawaja Abdullah al-Ansari's famous book, Manazir al-Sa'irin, right? Madarij al-Sadiqeen. So this is well known. Ibn Qudama did a mukhtasar of Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya. The Ihya is mostly, he says you have mukashifa and mu'amala. Those are the two types of tasawwuf. Mukashifa, ilm al-mukashifa, and ilm al-mu'amala. He said, this book is not about ilm al-mukashifa. It's about ilm al-mu'amala. So what he was saying is the Ihya is not about spiritual states. It's about akhlaq and refining the soul. He's got the Kitab al-Ibadat, right? The Kitab al-Mu'amalat, and then he's got the Muhlikat and the Munjiyat. It's 4 sections, 40 books, right? And at the heart of it is what? Book 20, the akhlaq of the Prophet ﷺ. That's the heart of the Ihya. So the architecture of the Ihya is very impressive. He begins it with the book of knowledge, not the book of Aqidah, the book of knowledge, defining what knowledge is, and defining who the knowledgeable, who the true ulama are, differentiating them from what he called the mutarassimun, the formalists, and then showing you what false ulama do. One of the things that false ulama do is they attack other ulama and belittle them in order to gain followers. That's a sign of false ulama. Because true ulama work at the level of ideas, and they don't attack people like that. They look at ideas and they write and do that, but they don't get up and slander Muslims and things like that. And then he says, "Adatun biha shuru'," a tool that you need to start with, and that's the Arabic language. So that's this tool that you need to start with. And that doesn't mean that you can learn Islam and become a very educated Muslim in English. You can learn Islam and become a very educated Muslim in Urdu. You can learn Islam and become a very educated Muslim in Turkish or any of these languages. That's absolutely true. And there are many, many very learned Muslims that don't know Arabic. But to enter into really the realm of defending Islam and moving into that realm, it's to have access to those primary texts is important. But the Hanafi position is you don't need Arabic to understand Islam. And as an Ajami, Abu Hanifa was Ajami. I think, to me, that's the truth. But the vehicle of Arabic is extremely important. That's the position of the other three Imams, because the meanings that are embedded in Arabic, the semantic fields that are created by Arabic, the deep dimensions of the language are extremely important. And there's a reason why Allah chose Arabic to be the language that He spoke to His creation through. And so that's very important. But usul al-fiqh is really important in order to understand this religion. And I think it's good to have, what we did was just a very basic introduction to usul al-fiqh, which is useful to have some idea of how sophisticated our scholarship is in that. I think there was one other, and I'll end with that. I also want to say to everybody, somebody asked me, what course do I teach? I teach ethics at Zaytuna. I've taught logic, I've taught astronomy, I've taught the freshman seminar, and I've taught prophetic biography. But right now I'm teaching ethics. So we have to break. But I want to say I'm really very happy with the adab of this group, and it's really been impressive. And I we have to get to a point where we can just benefit from our people and not, and so I was just really pleased with how everybody, because I know there's people that could, with Dr. Nasser, could have brought up things that, just for me there's no point in bringing them up. And I was really happy that nobody did that, because he's somebody that I feel has just been such an intellectual powerhouse for our community. And he comes from a different tradition than I do, but he's not, and he's not a Rafidi by any stretch of the word. He's not somebody that speaks ill of Sahaba or anything like that. So it's important that we respect. And in our early period, Imam al-Bukhari has people from the Shia community in his Senate. There are Shia in Sahih al-Bukhari. And this was the early period. It was much more fluid than a lot of what's happened now with the divisiveness in the Muslim world right now between the Sunnis and the Shias. And undeniably, there have been atrocities on both sides. So in Iraq, there have been Shia death squads that have gone out and killed. But we're not those. This is not what we're about. We're about intelligence and honoring people and honoring differences and respecting different positions. So he's somebody that respects the ulama, irrespective of where they came from or who they are. And that's something that we really need to inculcate in our youth, just a respect for intelligence and for intellect and for achievement in any field or endeavor, and for goodness, people that have akhlaq and character. So I just want to thank everybody for being so respectful and just really wonderful group of people, young people that you give me personally, give me hope to see so many good faces and in our youth. And may Allah bless all of you. Jazakumullah khair.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So we will break until 3:45 p.m. for Asr, and then be back for the next class, inshallah.